And welcome back to a brand new edition, Tuesday edition of Franchise Players. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson. Loaded show today. Last week we were on spring break, so there was a lot of stuff that happened with the pro teams in North Carolina, the Carolina Panthers and the Charlotte Hornets in particular. So I wanted to go and get I wanted to go get a Panthers expert to ask him some questions about some of the stuff we've seen going on. You know, Sam Darnold was just introduced formally as the Panthers quarterback on Monday of this week, bringing in John Ellis, Panthers podcaster. You can follow him on Twitter at @OneEllisPlace. John, what's going on, brother? I know you've been busy, man.
Well, it's actually One Panther Place, but I might start a One Ellis Place.
What Ellis Place? I'm so sorry. I had that typed in there. I was like, that sounds really good. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
No worries. It's
One Panther Place.
It's funny, man. That's great. It's fine. People know where to find my fat head. Desmond, this is fun, man. I'm sorry. Desmond's been trying to track me down for 2 or 3 weeks. We've been trying to connect, man, and I've just had so much stuff going on with family and other work stuff. But just to join you, man. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Yeah, man. And trust me, I know how it is. I've got 2 kids myself dealing with this homeschool nonsense and everything else from the remnants of 2020. So I totally got it whenever something would pop up. So let's just get right into it. The Panthers formally introduced new Panthers quarterback Sam Darnold on Monday via virtual press conference. The Panthers traded a 2021 6th-round pick plus 2022 second and 4th-round picks for Darnold. Now that we're about a week or so removed from that trade, what are your thoughts on Sam Darnold and his potential fit in Joe Brady's offense in Charlotte?
Well, it's an interesting acquisition, Desmond. You talked about the trade compensation. They only give up a 6th in this year's draft, which I think is good. Billy Marshall and our podcast, we talked about this week, that the downside to that is the back-end compensation next year. We felt that might have been a little heavy, but again, I also made the point, so did Billy, that we feel like it's a little hard to judge the compensation at this juncture because we just don't know who Sam Darnold is right now. I've looked on the tape with Sam. This is what I can tell you. And it's not unlike something else you'll hear out there, but my own spin on it would be this, that he is very good outside of structure when things break down, because they have broken down a lot there in terms of protection. He knows how to make plays on the run. He's a very good athlete, underrated athlete. He'll fit well into Joe Brady's system, I think. But what he needs to work on, and this is hopefully some of the coaching that he'll get from Sean Ryan, the quarterback coach, Joe Brady, of course, the offensive coordinator, will be getting protected in the pocket, first of all. That gets back to our draft conversation, which I'm sure we'll have. But he's going to have to get better from within the pocket. That's something he struggled with in terms of fumbles, in terms of occasionally throwing that, he mentioned he's seen ghosts that game a few years ago. And it did look like that Pats game. He's only 23, so it's going to happen. But some of the picks on tape were a little bit questionable. I think that's a product of his own carelessness at times, and he'd probably first tell you that, and that's a developmental thing. But also, you look at the weapons. He had Robbie Anderson for a minute there, and he made a huge play to him against the Cowboys, threw a dime on a post route. But he lost Robbie early there. Robbie leaves last year, and then production goes down across the board. So I just think this will be a good opportunity for Sam to get together with Joe Brady, who's got a bright mind, a bright future in this league, with DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, Taylor Moton on the right side. You've got John Miller back in the folded guard. You've also got Robbie Anderson, like I mentioned. Dan Arnold, the 6'10". Who knows what other weapons will be coming through the draft. So I think, a lot like Bridgewater, this is a good audition time. It's not a long-term deal. It's the back end of his rookie deal with a possible 5th-year option. So for compensation, look, I don't know yet if it's a good trade or not for Carolina, but I'm optimistic more than I am pessimistic.
Is there a strength that Sam Darnold has? Because I know you're a huge film junkie. I know that you like to go through film, check guys out, especially when the Panthers bring a guy in. And with a guy like Darnold, who didn't have a whole lot of tape on him because he's only been in the league for 3 years, is there a strength to Darnold compared to Teddy Bridgewater? I know one of the things I used to come down, or still do come down on Teddy, is the whole Teddy check down thing, that it felt like Teddy was more prone to take the short pass than to even try to throw it deep. And we saw that really in particular the last 3 games of the season that the Panthers had, where Teddy just literally cut that part of the field off and didn't even bother to go that direction. Is there a strength that Sam Darnold brings to this offense that Teddy couldn't?
My feeling on Teddy, just to get to him for a minute, and it's always been this way by looking at Teddy's film, he's always understood his limitations, probably to a little bit of a fault. And that's not to say that he's a timid player, but he's a very structured player. He enjoys playing within structure. He does not oftentimes try to throw a ball outside of his comfort zone, which quite honestly would be past 30 yards. The thing I like about Sam is he's got a little more, I would think, deep ball accuracy from the film I've looked at. Teddy can do some things nicely outside the pocket, too. He sprinted out, made some really nice throws to Samuel, to Moore last year, to Robbie, outside of the pocket when things broke down. What I like about Sam, he just feels like he's a little more well-built. He's younger. He hasn't had the history of injury trauma that Teddy has. Teddy's handled that very well, by the way. Emotionally, he's been a great leader. He's been a guy that teams rally around every time he stops. Coaches love him. Players love him. But at the end of the day, the limitations, you're right. He favors the shorter routes, probably to a fault for what I'd like to see. And I think it might just be a Tepper thing. It might be Scott Fitterer coming in and saying, look, Russell Wilson, the quarterback I was with in Seattle for years, was not afraid to launch the ball vertically. He was not a check down artist. So what we need is not Alex Smith part 2 here. What we need is a quarterback that has a higher ceiling, who can make more vertical throws happen. Completion percentage, look, he's under 60%. But one thing I will say, it's a little bit of the Jameis Winston effect. He's gonna throw some duds once in a while, but he's gonna take some shots, and he can throw a really pretty post route, a really nice go route. I saw that on tape. What you got to do is just, from a mental perspective, just clean up some of the mistakes. Don't fumble the ball as much, and get a little better from within the pocket. The footwork is a little bit tentative and sloppy at times. I don't know if it's something he can correct or wants to correct. That's a whole thing. We got like the Cam Newton. We talked about that for years. You can get around that if you overcompensate in other areas. I just think Sam has got some potential, and I trust Scott Fitter. I really do. I've talked to a lot of people who know Scott. We talked to Sam Farmer from the LA Times a couple weeks ago. Sam has known Scott since he was in high school. We talked to a person about this. We also talked to Doug Farrar from USA Today, who has covered the Seahawks for years. And I think they all feel that Scott is just got the right chops for this in terms of evaluating players. I think a Marty Hurney move compared to a Scott Fitterer move, I'm sleeping easier at night from a football perspective and a contract perspective, thinking about what Scott Fitterer move. I'm honestly more satisfied with this than I was with the Bridgewater acquisition.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And and we'll go through some of the player acquisitions they've done this offseason in a bit, but I've been really impressed with Fitterer in terms of how they've structured these deals. You mentioned Marty Hurney, and a guy like Hasan Reddick, that would have been like a 4-year, $50 million deal under Marty Hurney. Whereas, with Scott Fitterer,
absolutely,
it's like a prove it kind of deal. It's almost like they're just doing 1-year, 2-year deals to young guys that are still hungry. They create competition.
Real quick here, and I'll let you finish there. Two people who deserve a lot of credit for that, I think, is Samir Suleiman, the cap guy, who was mentioned today by Matt Rule and has been mentioned throughout, is one of the sort of the magicians here in terms of making things work from a cap perspective. They had to climb out of a dead money hole here. They still had Matt Khalil in the books for a while. Luke's dead cap was atrocious this year from his retirement. They might face the same thing now with Bridgewater. So, again, Samir Suleiman, you've got Scott Fitterer, Pat Stewart of the front office. I like the structure. The Hasan Reddick thing, I think you can thank Matt Rule for that. Honestly, Billy and I talked about that too on the pod. That deal probably doesn't get done anywhere else other than Carolina. And that's where relationships and free agency come and play. And when you have a relationship with a guy like Reddick, who is a guy that obviously looked up to you, close in college, you coached him in college, you're going to get him on, I don't want to say a hometown discount, but certainly a friendship discount. So, yeah, I think you're spot on. I think they've done a really good job. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, you're good. Got on the line with us here, John Ellis, infamous Panther podcaster. You can follow him at One Panther Place on Twitter. Let's talk draft a little bit because it's right around the corner, literally less than 2 weeks away here. Even though they signed Sam Darnold, I don't really catch the vibe from them that Sam is entrenched as the starter, especially after listening to the press conference today with Matt and then with Sam coming on. Sam seems like he's kind of been told he's going to be in competition, maybe not necessarily with Teddy Bridgewater, but with someone. If a guy like Justin Fields is sitting on the board at pick 8 and Carolina still has their pick at 8, do the Panthers still, do they need to pick him? Would you, if Justin Fields is sitting there at 8?
I don't know if it was me. Yes, absolutely. I'm running that card. I'm doing a full Steve Smith 4-3 sprint at that table with that card with his name on it. Look, I don't know if Fields will drop. So many people have opinions on these quarterbacks, and I do my share of film study. I try to be a little humble about it, and I try to hold a little back because I think some people overstep what they think they know in terms of these evals. And I respect the high-level guys that do this from the college game, the analysts out there like Matt Bowen, Greg Cosell, Stephen Ruiz, guys like that I follow on Twitter who know, Betts. There's guys like that on Twitter. They know what they're looking at. I've got the same chops, I think, in terms of understanding what these quarterbacks are all about. But I can't project what Fields is going to be. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. There could be a quarterback like a Kellen or a Davis Mills who ends up being better than 2 or 3 of these first-round guys just by virtue of situation, just by virtue of surrounding cast. But I'll say this, if Justin Fields, who I currently have as my second best quarterback in this draft, if I got to rank people, I hate ranking people, but there you go. I think to me, on my board, for my preferences, the athleticism, the ability to do things vertically with that arm, the fearlessness, the toughness that he played against Clemson, man, and just making big throws against big-time opponents, rolling through the Big Ten, just unscathed. I know the Northwestern game, I believe it was, caught a little people off guard with his tape, but right. I think other than that, I mean, you just put on that Clemson tape. I talked to a scout recently who was at one of these pro days, and he'll tell you right now, the scout told me, again, anonymously here, that's how we work. It was just one of the best tapes he's ever seen from a college player, that Clemson game. That tape against Clemson, it looked great on the broadcast, but from a scout's view, he was as blown away as we were as fans, and that's uncommon. Scouts usually a little more critical than we are as fans looking back. But this individual who's done this for a long time said, look, that tape against Clemson cemented it for me. He's kind of right there, number 2 on my list. I agree with this individual. And with others as well who see Fields as a great fit for San Francisco. But, man, if he slides, Desmond, if he's sitting there at number 8 and they don't take him and he goes on to have a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen type of run here, oh, boy. And Sam Darnold gives you kind of that Bridgewater-esque type of couple of years. That one's going to leave a mark because I don't know if you're going to get a draft for this anytime soon with this many, kind of I don't say surefire bets, but man, there are guys in this top round of this draft that just feel like they're ready to go. Even Mac Jones in and start for these teams. So yeah, I think if there's a guy on the board they like, and I would like Fields personally, yeah, I'd take him, no doubt.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Lamar Jackson there, and you brought back painful memories of me wanting them to draft Lamar Jackson to sit behind Cam Newton in 2018, I believe it was. 2018, right? They got DJ Moore instead halfway through the first, and it was like Lamar Jackson was this forgotten guy until the end of the first round when the Ravens grabbed him. I was like, man, that's going to turn into beautifulness for them. So I wanted to get him.
Lamar slid because a lot of got it wrong, and a lot of coaches got it wrong. Now, here's what I'll say about Lamar real quickly, that the system limits him, and it also helps him. Greg Roman has done some things to help him in terms of his efficiency, but there's also some limitations there, too, in terms of holding him back, I see at times. Lamar is a tremendous passer, tremendous processor, and was always that way in Louisville. And somehow you get out there that were asking him to move the wide receiver. And I think that's where now you see the narrative with the pushback on Justin Fields, where people are saying, you don't want to tear down Mac Jones, but we're starting to leapfrog Mac Jones above Justin Fields. And you go back and you look at the tape, I think people have had enough of quarterbacks. And I'll just be blunt with you. Black quarterbacks have been scouted for years around this league. Doug Farrar from USA Today wrote a great piece on this. And I would recommend anybody go find Doug Farrar and read his piece on Twitter about the history of, I don't know, it's not racism, but it is that fundamental miscalculation and the inability to see these quarterbacks as quarterbacks. It was so frustrating for years. You get a Steve McNair, you get a Cam Newton, you get a Donovan McNabb, and still Lamar Jackson comes along and we're asking him, maybe he's a better fit at receiver. It was ridiculous. But yeah, I could have seen that a real good fit too. DJ Moore worked out nicely. But hey, like you said, if Justin Fields is there at 8, you're tempting me, man. I would love to have him here.
Well, I've got another temptation here for you because Florida tight end Kyle Pitts mentioned that he had spoke to head coach Matt Rule and that they've had plans to speak again. If Pitts is on the board along, say, with, I don't know, Oregon left tackle Penei Sewell, who does John take? You got Pitts sitting there, an offensive weapon, Sewell, a tackle they desperately need. Who would you take?
That's a tough one, man. It's a fun problem to have, though, right? I mean, if they're sitting there and they've taken their time and made the decision, look, these quarterbacks are off the board. Maybe Trey Lance will still be there, but they've decided Lance might not be their guy. And they're at 8. And all of a sudden, Penei Sewell or Christian Slater have miraculously fallen in their lap. And miraculously, somehow, with maybe a run of wide receivers, maybe Waddle sneaks in the top 6. Smith, Chase. Obviously, there's going to be a run on receivers at some point. Draft night's going to be fascinating. If Pitt slides to 8-2, if it's between him and those offensive linemen, right now, yes, I'd go with Pitts. And here's why. There are still some guys in free agency you can get in the door. Villanueva comes to mind. Mitchell Schwartz. You've got people. Wagner's another left tackle. You can bring guys in that are serviceable enough to patch that up. I know people don't like the idea of doing that. But the plus side of that is you get a 6'6" monster out there dominating corners, slot corners, linebackers, and safeties. And it would be remarkable to watch him grow within a Joe Brady offense. So yeah, at this point, one more thing, it's a deep draft as far as left tackles go. So you can end up getting a guy in the second round that could end up being your guy. I'd go with Pitts if he's on the board, Desmond. I really would.
This really just popped in my head, but I just realized that I think it was Washington. They cut Thadius Moss, the former LSU tight end that had played under Joe Brady's system and son of Randy Moss, who a lot of our listeners here are familiar with because he played high school ball here in North Carolina, down in Charlotte. Will you give a flyer on Moss, or you think he's too slow for the NFL, or would you bring him in knowing he's familiar with Brady's offense?
I was thinking about it earlier, but I'm just actually reading this now. This just broke a little while ago. That looks like the Bengals have put in a waiver claim for him. So it looks like, and that makes sense with Joe Burrow, obviously. That'll be a great fit for him. But if I'm reading this right, it looks like he's off the board. Yeah, Moss would have been, again, not the most athletic guy, believe it or not, even though his genes are good in that regard. Right? He's a different type of tight end than a Pitts. Pitts, I don't even think is a tight end. Billy said on the pod he's more like Mike Evans, and I could totally see that. Like a Julius Peppers version of Mike Evans.
Yeah, imagine Julius Peppers who playing tight end for a decade. Yeah, that's kind of how I picture it. He reminds me of Pep, man, with that wingspan and the ability to just dominate at his position. He's a man amongst kids out there. So Thaddeus Moss would have been a pretty good fit with Joe Brady, but I think that's off the table. And then really quick before I let you go, John, the Panthers have been busy. I wanted to touch on the defensive side of the ball because that's where the Panthers have done a lot of their damage in free agency so far. On defense, ESPN's projected front seven for the Panthers 4-3 base defense, although they were kind of running a 3-3 like hybrid type thing under Phil Snow last year a lot. Mm-hmm. Newly signed defensive end Hasan Reddick, Mike Pasulik at defensive tackle, second year top pick Derek Brown at defensive tackle, emerging defensive end star Brian Burns. You got Yatur Matos Gross, Marquise Haynes, newly signed Morgan Fox, Bravion Roy is back. They signed AJ Boye, who has made a Pro Bowl at the end of last week. Which one of those defensive additions are you the most excited about, and why?
Hasan Reddick. I mean, it's I not know any of these other guys, but he by far is the most exciting piece. When you put on the tape with Reddick, we made a little vignette of his sacks from last year on our Twitter page, and he had 5 against New York Giants. So that can end up being sort of a sign of a fluky type season. But then you look at the other 7.5 sacks he picked up, and these were impact sacks. These were sacks in key situations, several fumbles, strip sacks. He gets the ball, and he's just like Brian Burns in that regard. He's got great lean, great fundamentals in terms of getting around the edge, good bend, and he's a prototypical flex player for Phil Snow. I think what you'll see, the 4-3 front, again, in base situations, you're going to face that against run-heavy teams. And again, I would say run-heavy teams because New Orleans and Tampa are still very run-heavy. When you look at how they operate with bigger personnel, you need a good 4-3 base, but also you're going to have to mix in sub packages. So in terms of nickels, running maybe a 3-man front there with, I don't know, you can run Morgan Fox on the outside, on the edge, get your Derek Brown monster inside, running 3 technique shaded a little bit, and then you can put a number of people at the other edge there. Brian Burns would maybe be at sort of a hybrid backer. One thing we talked about, though, on our show earlier, Crown Score with Kevin Stewart, Reggie Walker, Reggie made the comment that Brian Burns is at his best with his hand in the dirt. And I agree. The more they can do that with Burns, Reddick shows the same flashes as well. I'm excited just as a film junkie, not even a fan, just looking at the film next year with 43 on one side, if he keeps his number, by the way, Reddick, and then 53 on the other side. I think it's going to make quarterbacks miserable in this conference. So, yeah, good signing by Carolina.
I can't wait. We're a week or so away from the draft. This is the time of the year where every team is 0-0 and optimistic about the year. Follow John on Twitter at OnePantherPlace for the latest in film study, news from the Panthers, podcast, Panthers related. Everything that John's doing over there is fantastic. I appreciate you coming on today, man.
Thanks for letting me ramble a little bit, Desmond. It's always fun, man. Appreciate you.
Coming up, voice of the Charlotte Hornets, Sam Farber, joins us. The Hornets staying afloat without their top stars. How are they doing this? We'll find out next on Franchise Players.